Welcome to the Lindamood-Bell submission of the Visualizing and Verbalizing program for the Virginia Department of Education. My name is Dave Kivita. I am Director of Development for Lindamood-Bell for Schools, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Tracy Hall.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tracy Hall, and I am Professional Development Presenter for Lindamood-Bell for Schools, and I train teachers to utilize the Lindamood-Bell programs.
Great. All right. Thank you, Tracy. And Tracy's going to help me out as we go through this process. First, we're going to talk big picture about the theory that underlies the program. We'll talk a little bit about what are some of the critical components of the program. And then we're going to dive into the materials that you have access to, talk about how to think about those, as well as show some lesson plans and some additional materials that you have access to as you think about the program. So we're going to dive in, as I said, big picture. The Visualizing and Verbalizing program, as the Lindamood-Bell's programs all are, come from years of working with students that really helped us focus in on what was the primary cause of students' reading difficulties. And we know that the brain can only process sensory information. And so it's really critical to understand then that the primary cause of a student's reading difficulty is at the sensory level. And some individuals have strengths in sensory processing and some do not. And weaknesses in specific sensory cognitive functions is the primary cause of a student's difficulty in learning how to read. And we've discovered that through providing intensive intervention and using the Visualizing and Verbalizing program, the brain can begin to make connections between different parts of the brain. This was very deeply studied at the University of Alabama, Birmingham, seeing different parts of the brain light up that had not been lighting up previously based on questioning very specifically down to the sensory cognitive function that was a deficit for those students. So we know these cognitive functions are the foundation of language and literacy skills. There are three primary sensory cognitive functions that we address at Lindamood-Bell. Those are phonemic awareness, that ability to locate sounds within words, symbol imagery, which is really what underlies students' ability to orthographically map sounds and letters within words. It's that ability to make that connection. And then what's called concept imagery, which I often talk about as the ability to make a movie in your mind. Nancy Bell talks about it as the ability to create an image gestalt or a whole for oral and written language. And that picturing that movie in your mind is not about just bits and pieces, isolated facts and information, but instead a whole that you can see so that you can think critically. The easiest way to think about this is if you took a very simple word like the word cat. You could think about how if a student's going to read a passage about a cat, they have to have good phonemic awareness to sound it out if they don't recognize that word right away, right? So they've got to be able to recognize that. What's the second sound in the word cat, Tracy?
Is ah.
Ah, great. And so they can say at, cat, if they've got good phonemic awareness. Ultimately, if they sound out the word in one passage, I want them to recognize it right away in the next passage. So instead, they can just look and they can see that word and they can immediately say what, Tracy?
Cat.
Cat. Excellent. So phonemic awareness and symbol imagery really have to do with decoding. When we're thinking about language comprehension as separate from decoding, we want to be thinking about students' concept imagery. Concept imagery is that ability to create a movie in your mind. And so if we take a very basic word like cat, I could say, Tracy, rather than saying, Tracy, what's the definition of a cat? Or what is a cat? I want to say, Tracy, what are you picturing for a cat? So tell us what you're picturing for a cat, Tracy.
I'm picturing a furry animal about this big. It's all black with pointy ears and a long skinny tail.
Nice job. And we might even question and flesh out, it's got four legs, maybe some other details to it. And the color of the cat doesn't really matter, but the gestalt, the idea of what that cat is what matters. And that's very different than asking a student a question like, what is a cat? And that's critical because as students are progressing from kindergarten through 12th grade, we very often notice that they begin to have real difficulties. We might notice that at kindergarten, first grade, second grade, by the time they hit that critical grade of third grade, and all of a sudden, all of this content information is going to come in. If students are still struggling with that ability to make a movie in their mind, that small gap is going to open up into a very large gap. They can't understand math word problems. They can't understand scientific experiments. It's not just about ELA content. It's about everything. And historically, what has happened is students like that have gotten help with the content, right? We help them by scaffolding the content, by reading the content, by simplifying the content. Unfortunately, what happens is those students will get enough help with the content to get onto the next grade, and then they need what? Help all over again to get on to the next grade, right? So we want to focus on process-based instruction. Process-based instruction focuses on explicitly and intentionally developing the underlying sensory cognitive function that is a weakness so that we can turn it into a strength, and the student can apply that then over to their content material and be an independent learner and reader. And when we think about a Venn diagram about the component parts of reading, we know that students have to have good word attack skills, but they also have to have very good word recognition skills. If students come to us with a low vocabulary, that's certainly going to impact their ability to derive meaning from language, right? But all of these are really subsets of the whole point of reading, which is comprehension. And that there are, in fact, students who decode effectively, but they don't comprehend what it is that they are decoding. So in fact, they are not readers. They are just decoders. And so we need to make sure that we're explicitly and intentionally driving at developing that underlying cognitive function of concept imagery for those students. And concept imagery isn't just something that was created out of the blue. It comes from or aligns with what's called the dual coding theory, which is a theory of cognition that a gentleman named Alan Pavio, who was a cognitive psychologist, developed and researched years ago. He talks about cognition. Our ability to understand something is about an interplay between the verbal and the nonverbal systems. So if Tracy comes up to me and she starts telling me about what she did yesterday, I have to be able to picture that in my mind. Now, if Tracy comes up and she speaks to me in Mandarin, and I don't know Mandarin, I can hear all of those individual sounds, but they're not going to create a movie in my mind that I can hold on to. Same way, I have to turn around and flip that in the other direction. If I can picture something I did yesterday, I have to be able to use my words. I have to be able to verbalize effectively enough that Tracy can see the same thing that's happening in my mind, or same thing that I'm talking about, right? And that's why everybody talks about it. Picture's worth 1,000 words, right? Or they say, well, I wasn't really picturing the same thing, right? We weren't seeing eye to eye, right? All of those things are different ways of talking about that role of imagery. And the dual coding theory really is one of the strongest candidates for developing a unified, scientifically based theory of literacy. And folks have talked about how it provides a unified account of all the aspects of reading under a common set of principles. So, imagery is this primary sensory cognitive function. There isn't just one type of imagery. There's imagery for parts and there's imagery for wholes. Symbol imagery, which is focused on decoding, is imaging for sounds and letters within words. Concept imagery is about an imaged whole, right? So for symbol imagery, we're thinking about, those individual letters and sounds within a word like short. For concept imagery, we're thinking about a whole sequence of events as we're listening to a story about a short clown, right? And we've got to be able to picture for that. So concept imagery is that ability to create that image gestalt. It's also, Nancy Bell talks a lot about how it's that thing that keeps words from coming in one ear and going out the other, right? Similar to the way I was talking about Tracy if she was talking to Mandarin. Those sounds are coming in one ear and going out the other. Nothing's holding on to it because I can't picture for it, right? So the student needs to be able to create an imaged whole or a gestalt from listening to a story. And they have to be able to create that movie, not just, as I mentioned, for isolated pieces, but they have to be able to hold on to their picture for the first sentence, see how that picture changes as new information comes in, because that's what allows them to take that imaged whole and apply it over to higher order thinking. How did my picture change from the beginning of the story to the end of the story as this new information came in? That helps me make a main idea, helps me draw conclusions, make inferences, predict and extend based on what it is that I've learned, right? And evaluate it just generally all of those critical thinking pieces. And so as we think about imagery, you can think about how there is this language processing spectrum. There are some students who struggle with decoding. There are other students who struggle with comprehension. Students who are struggling with decoding, the sensory cognitive function they're struggling with is symbol imagery and phonemic awareness. Students who struggle with language comprehension and critical thinking are struggling with concept imagery. And there are certainly students who struggle with both of those areas. The goal, as we mentioned earlier, is to get our students to a level of being independent. And so we're going to engage in a very Socratic back and forth in order to help the students be able to picture for language, right? So rather than just Tracy comes in and I say, Tracy, I'm going to read you a story and I want you to make pictures in your mind for it. Tracy would say what? Great.
Yeah, let's make movies.
Sure. Let's go ahead and make some movies, right? And if it was that easy, that would be dynamite, right? But you really have to start to build that, and you have to draw conscious and an explicit attention to that cognitive act. Tracy, you probably had that experience where late at night you might be very, very tired. You sit down and you read through a whole page of text, and what do you say at the end?
I have no idea what that was about. I got to read it all over again.
No idea at all. But you decoded all those words, right? Yep. You read them all, but you weren't engaged in that explicit task of picturing for those words and what it was that they meant in creating that movie. And so at Lindamood-Bell in the Visualizing and Verbalizing program, we're going to break language down into its component parts and then begin to build up very sequentially and very systematically, going from providing students with initially the vocabulary that they'll need in order to be able to talk about a picture that's in their mind, then be able to talk about one isolated picture that's in front of them, then working on their imagery for a single word and being able to verbalize about that, multiple words within a sentence, multiple sentences within a paragraph, and extend that over to writing and critical thinking. And so the questioning, the Socratic interaction that we'll do is to question down to students' sensory input, explicitly engage them in a Socratic interaction in which they'll learn to monitor, hold on to what they pictured, compare it to what the text said, provide them the opportunity to self-correct, and by doing that, our students are going to become more independent. Okay? And so we don't want to tell our students, no, that wasn't correct, go read it again, or nope, try a little bit harder, or no, this is the thing you should be thinking about. Instead, we want to provide some positive reinforcement. Great job picturing that cat. Your words really helped me see that it was mostly black with a little bit of white on it. Let's see what else the sentence said about where the cat was. And now I can question back to that and help my student create a more fluid picture. Critical components of the program are that it is systematic, explicit, and cumulative. It's aligned to not only a science of reading, but it's aligned to a theory of cognition. This program is not merely about checking off boxes. Do we teach vocabulary? Do we teach background knowledge, etc.? It really is about, are we developing the underlying cognitive functions students need to develop so that they can build their vocabulary and so that they can build and acquire background knowledge, rather than just saying we're going to give them background knowledge. So it develops those underlying processes. It's not scripted, which means that we're not going to treat all students as though they are the same. We do have a scope and sequence. We do have steps. We do have language that we want the teachers to be using, but ultimately the pacing of the program and how the teachers are responding to their students' response in real time is where real differentiation comes in, because each student's going to need different types of questioning in order to help them think about their picturing or their verbalization in a way that is specific to them. And that really does come from that Socratic back and forth. You'll have access to this RTI model in your in one of the documents that's been uploaded for you in the submission. We do point out that when we're thinking about intervention for students, if we're thinking about students who are in need of tier 3 intervention, kids who are standard deviation or more below the norm are going to need, research shows, 80 to 120 hours of intervention to close that gap. So we do recommend that instruction be provided in small groups of 5 or fewer intensively, as close to 5 days a week, an hour a day as we can get, so that we can achieve that 80 to 120 hours. Programs can certainly be used in tier 2 settings. groups of 8 or fewer students, 4 or 5 times a week, 30 to 45 minutes of instruction in those groups. And I will make a plug. It's a fantastic program to be used in tier 1 settings, even though that's not what this submission is for. It's really an amazing program at that setting. All right. So the next thing we're going to do is to dive into the materials themselves, show you what they look like, and walk through a quick lesson plan so you have an understanding of how the processes overlap. Mentioned, you'll have several places where you can find materials for the Department of Ed review. The main place will be in the LMS, or the Learning Management System that we're providing. In there, you'll find the Visualizing Verbalizing manual so that you can go through the manual. The manual is referenced, obviously, in all of the other materials. So you'll have an opportunity to take a look at that. We'll go through and take a look at the materials for each of the different steps in just a moment. You will have a scope and sequence that's laid out for you. Talks about the different steps that we'll be going through as you overlap through each of these different steps. It's really important to know that the Visualizing and Verbalizing program is not all about doing one particular step at a given time and then doing that step again and again and again. Instead, it is about beginning with a step and then overlapping to the next step to see how the student does with that, and be thinking about the steps as a means to an end. All right. And then you'll also have access to a workshop handbook. And the handbook might actually be the easiest way for you to go through and understand all of the parts of the program. Lists out the steps here, and also refers to specific manual pages as you go through the discussion in here, and then goes into the specific steps, right? Talks about what's happening with the steps, shows you a little bit of what the materials look like and what the teacher prompts look like. And we're going to, and then you can refer back to the LMS as well. So we'll be using both the LMS. I also have the materials that are in the kit here. So we'll be referencing these as we go as well, so that you'll have an understanding that those do exist online, but they also exist in kit form. The kit form ones are, in many cases, a little bit more detailed than what it is that you're seeing in the online version. Okay. All right. So in your handbook, you'll notice if you go down to page, scrolling through here. All right, here we go. Page 42, you'll be able to find a lesson plan. And this is a sample lesson plan. It's provided to teachers. And again, it's important to emphasize the point that this is about differentiated instruction. So this is a sample lesson plan. The teacher's using their good thinking as they progress through this. We've got some instructions at the top of it. You've got a goal and objective for what it is that you're going to be doing within that lesson. Have the lesson steps laid out with how much time should be apportioned to each of those different steps on the left-hand side. You'll see how it is that these steps overlap and then repeat themselves, right? And then you've got goals for your next lesson plan. Following that initial lesson plan, you'll see what a lesson plan looks like as my students have progressed through those initial steps. And now we're overlapping again from sentence by sentence imaging to what's called multiple sentence imaging, and then whole paragraph imaging. And then we'll continue on through this process talking about how those steps continue to grow. Right? So if we use this as our framework for talking about the materials, the first step that we'll begin with is called picture to picture. References the page manual pages in there so that you can reference that back in your manual. I'm going to show you what this looks like in the LMS so you'll have an understanding of how to use this, and Tracy and I will go through a little bit of it. So go down here to picture to picture, you can click on launch the course. Here's my picture to picture book. Has instructions with a basic overview, talks about what the teacher prompts are within this step. And here are the directions, kind of lays out how to use these directions. And then the very first picture is of a dog chasing a ball. And the way that this is set up is the student will be looking at a picture that's in front of them. And again, that picture is on an easel book. On the back are all of the prompts that you'll be seeing on a different screen page. Okay. So my student is Tracy. I'm going to say to Tracy, I want you to look at a picture that's in front of you. And I can't see the picture, right?
Okay.
Your words are going to help me see that same picture in my mind. And of course, that's my first lie of the day, because I do need to know what picture the student's looking at in order to question properly, right? But this is where we're first beginning to build the verbalization that the student needs to provide in order to talk about a picture that's in their mind. So before I can say to Tracy, great, picture a dog in your mind and describe it to me, I first need to give her some vocabulary to help her build that verbal expression. So the goal of this step is working on verbalization rather than visualization. So here's the prompt at the beginning. Here is the picture. I don't get to see it. Your words are going to help me see that same picture in your mind. Right? I'm going to start off. What's the main thing in the picture? The what? What's the main thing in the picture, Tracy?
It's a dog.
Great. And now I'm going to kind of start at the top of the dog and work my way down, because that helps me to picture it better. So what should I picture for the dog's face? Right? And I can start with a very broad question, and my student might not know what to say at that point. What do I picture for the dog's face? I don't know. Well, so I'm not just going to wait. Instead, we jump right in with some Socratic questioning, some choice and contrast. Should I picture the dog with his mouth open or closed? And we're using lots and lots of gestures in order to help communicate that idea that words lead to imagery. What should I picture the dog doing? And I'm going to continue to ask some questions. And there's an excellent lesson plan laid out in the manual that talks about the different types of questions and walks you right through what you should be doing there. At a certain point, when I feel like my students described this pretty well, I'm going to go through 12 structure words that I will introduce to my student. And I don't have to introduce all 12 of them the first day, right? I'm going to differentiate my instruction again. But I have them listed on the back, they also come in the kit. And so we can kind of go through these together, and I'll say, great, Tracy, and I'm still not looking at the picture as a teacher. Tracy, your words give me a really good picture for that. Let's just check and make sure we talked about everything. Did we talk about what? And Tracy can say, yep, we talked about.
Yep, we talked about a dog. It was a brown dog running after a ball.
Awesome. Did we talk about size? And we're just going through, and if we haven't talked about them, we're going to get some more details now. Did we talk about how many dogs? It's also a chance for great positive reinforcement. Yeah, we talked about shape. You told me a dog had a really long, skinny tongue that was kind of curved, right? Talked about where. All of those things. So the student checks through the structure words, telling me back the details. And then the teacher, again, without looking at the picture, says to the student, great, your words made me picture. And this is where I'm modeling for the student ultimately how I want them to be describing a picture. So I'm going to give a really good description of this picture. I might leave something out or change something to see if my student is monitoring, as we talked about earlier, so that they can correct me, right? If I say, oh, it was a dog that was running outside after a ball and the dog was polka dotted, and if they don't notice that I said it was polka dotted, then that tells me they're not monitoring, right? They do, they go, oh, no, it's not polka dotted. I said it was a brown dog. Great, right? And we know that they are monitoring. So that picture-to-picture step is something that's going to be on the lesson plan for a little while. As we're thinking about it, it's going to be on the lesson plan for a little while until we feel like the students really mastered that step with about 80% accuracy, right? I'm not looking for it to be perfect. They're doing it well enough. They're doing it for the goal of that step, which is to, and I should take back that word mastery, they're doing it for the purpose of developing that vocabulary. Once they have developed the vocabulary to describe a picture, I go into word imaging. Word imaging is generally done at the known noun level. Again, that's pages 98 to 117 in your manual. And this is where I'm now going to say a word to the student. And rather than showing them a picture, I'm going to help the student create a picture in their own mind and then verbalize about that picture. I'm going to go through the same process. So, Tracy, let's picture for the word clown. Tell me what that word makes you picture. And like we did last time, how about start at the top and go down? Like, what are you picturing for the clown's hat? Is he wearing a hat?
She has a pointy hat that's purple with gold polka dots on it.
Purple with gold polka dots. Awesome. Right. And so we start to flesh out this description. If I'm doing this in a small group, we're all trying to kind of create the same picture in our minds. I'm questioning from top down. I'm keeping those structure words in mind. Once I feel like I've gotten a pretty good description, I'll go back through those structure words again with my student to make sure. And then the real task for me as the teacher is to describe back to the student saying, your words made me picture. And the student has to listen to my description of what it was that they helped picture, and check to make sure that I've done everything correctly. Okay. The next step after word imaging. So now we've gone from describing a picture that's in front of us, picturing for a single word. Now we're going to put a word into a sentence and do what's called single sentence imaging, and then move into what's really the heart of the program, which is sentence by sentence imaging with higher order thinking. And this is where we're going to take a paragraph and break it down into its component parts, right? The individual sentences, build images for each of those parts, go back through and provide a picture summary to make sure that we're holding on to all of those parts, and then turn that picture summary into a word summary. So we're turning it into a whole now and helping them create a main idea from that and think critically about it. So if we go back to our LMS, the place that we want to go to is in here, we'll go to the Imagine That Giant books. I will let you know that these are in the kit. They're the sentence by sentence easel books, right? And it does break down the process a sentence at a time. So the student's looking at the sentence. On the back, the teacher has all of the prompts that they're going through, right? Obviously, we want them to go through some additional questioning, but this gets them started. And then they read the next sentence, and there's space for them to put down a colored square. And there's the prompts on the back, okay? So when I set this step up, I'll say to Tracy, we're going to read a story. We're going to read it a sentence at a time. And for each sentence, we're going to make a picture, okay? And for each picture that you make, you're going to put down a colored square. Right? There's nothing specific about the color of the square and anything in the picture. It's just there to help you remember that you created, a separate picture, right? And then I'll ask you some questions about it, make sure we've got everything pictured really well. And then I'll read you the next sentence and we'll create a picture for that one and then the next one. Okay. So you guys can see that the process is kind of laid out there, right? And then the student will be looking at just this sentence and the title. I can be reading it to them at this point, right? So I'm not counting on their ability to be decoding it. On the back is where my teacher has the whole story listed out, because it's important for the teacher to know where the whole story is going, right? The student is working parts to whole. So the student's just going to be picturing for the first sentence. I'm not going to read them the whole story. So a boy kicked a rotting log in a forest. What do those words make you picture? Student starts to describe their picture, question for some details. For the first sentence only, I check through the structure words. Same thing for the next sentence. Then hundreds of bees flew out of a hole in the log. Student puts down a colored square. What do those words make you picture? Then the third sentence, the boy quickly ran away, swatting at the bees near his face and neck. Now what we do is go back and have the student touch each colored square and say, here I saw, describe back their picture, here I saw, here I saw. Collect the colored squares once they've given you that picture summary. If they leave out something, you say, well, this is where the boy, your words made me picture the boy kicked the log and then the bees did something. First there was just a couple bees and then something, hundreds of bees came flying. Great. Not questioning back to the words, we're questioning back to the pictures. Student reverbalizes their image. And when we go back through and we get to turn those pictures into a word summary, we say, use your pictures to help you recall what happened, but tell the story back in your own words. And then we ask for a main idea question. From everything you pictured, what's the main idea of this story, right? And then you get to ask some of those other higher order thinking questions you want to ask. Why did the bees fly out of the hole? Why did the boy only swat at the bees near his face and neck? What would you picture happening next? So that's what that main step of the program looks like. From there, what we do is increase the amount of content students are picturing for at a time, from a single sentence to multiple sentences within a paragraph to a whole paragraph to multiple paragraphs on a page, as well as increasing the grade level or the complexity of the text that we're asking the student to image for. We also overlap, of course, into writing. We emphasize that good writing comes from good verbalization. So if a student's going to be doing writing, what they first have to do is to be able to verbalize. So that's why we've been working on visualizing and verbalizing the whole way. But we do explicitly tie that over to writing and then work on the parts of that. Other materials that you do have access to in the LMS as well is the VV progress chart, picture vocabulary book, which is kind of like an in-between step from picture to picture and word imaging. You have the different storybooks that are all laid out there. And then in your workshop handout, you have some examples of different material with the process broken down for students to work through. So all of those materials are available for you in the LMS. And if you all have any questions or